Welcome to 50 Scales of Gray. I'm attorney Michael Bender, co-founder of the Gray Legal Group, your family law firm where we help business owners and professionals survive divorce with their money in their pockets and their kids by their sides. For the next 30 minutes, we're going to dive into the exciting world of California family law issues. Now, of course, the views I and my guests express during the show are ours only and are given for informational purposes only and not legal advice. If you have a family law case, I highly advise you talk with an attorney one-on-one about your individual legal situation. On today's show, I'll be giving a brief overview of community property, what that is, what it means in the context of a divorce case, and how sometimes deciding who gets what can be challenging. I'll be joined later by my business partner, attorney Allison Tilton, who co-founded the Gray Legal Group with me back in 2016. She'll be discussing with me the unique aspects of owning a business, what that brings to a divorce case, and then tips on what business owners should know when they're divorcing their spouse. This is going to be great advice for both the business owner and their spouse, as spouses do need to know what to look out for as well. But first, community property. You may have heard the old saying, in a divorce, it's 50-50. And for the most part, it is. The reason that's the case here in California, it's a community property state, meaning both spouses have an equal interest in property that they obtain during their marriage. Now, there are some exceptions to the rule, such as inheritance, transfer of property to one spouse's name, or how things might be outlined in a prenup agreement. But the basic rule is if you got it when you were married, you each get half. Now, this goes for practically everything we consider property here in the state. Some examples, houses, caveat about title and how that's held, but cars, bank accounts, retirement accounts, furniture, toys, and even businesses. But what does it mean that you each have half an interest in community property? We obviously can't take some property and split it down the middle. It's not like the movies where a line is drawn in a house and each spouse gets to live in one half the house, or we cut a car in half. Bank accounts, retirement accounts, those are easy. But the big stuff, well, that's where the battle comes into play. When we talk about splitting up property, we're really talking about splitting up the value of property. So in a divorce, let's say one spouse gets a car worth $10,000. Who knows, with today's car value skyrocketing, it could be more. But anyways, let's just say for purposes here, one spouse gets a car, $10,000. The other spouse must get something that's worth the same $10,000. It could be another car. It could be some furniture. It could even just be flat out $10,000. At the end of a divorce, how much value each spouse gets must be equal. But how do we determine the value? Other than fighting over who gets a piece of property in a divorce, husband wants this, wife wants that, spouses will also argue over the value of the property. Now, tools such as Kelley Blue Book, Zillow, even an appraisal can be used to present to the court for the judge to determine the value of a piece of property. However, business valuations, even stock account, retirement account valuations, that can be difficult to ascertain, and a lot of information has to be given to the judge, especially if the parties separated quite some time ago. In the end, each party is entitled to a 50-50 split of the value of the community property. If the court makes a ruling after a trial, it has to adhere to this equal split. If a default judgment is entered, that means one party's really not participating and the other spouse is pushing through a judgment. A 50-50 split of all assets must be presented in a proposed judgment. However, if the parties come to agreement, they settle their case, they are going to split their community property. It doesn't necessarily have to be a 50-50 split. They can agree to some other ratio so long as they both agree that it's a fair and equitable division of their community property. So that's community property in a nutshell. Remember, this is the rule here in California. Other states can also be community property states, and some other equitable states where the court must determine what an appropriate division of the property is going to be. But here in California, the rule is 50-50. Hey, for more information about this topic, check out 50scalesofgray.com. That's gray with an E, 50scalesofgray.com. When we come back, we're going to dive into business ownership and how businesses are community property to be divided in a divorce with the Gray Legal Group's very own attorney, Allison Tilton. We'll be right back. Welcome back to 50 Scales of Gray. I'm attorney Michael Bender, co-founder of the Gray Legal Group, and it's time to welcome the other co-founder of the firm, attorney Allison Tilton. Allison, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Mike. It's so great to be here.
Hey, Allison, before we get into discussing the intricacies of owning a business and going through a divorce, can you give our listeners a little background about yourself?
Absolutely. So I've been an attorney for about 14 years and practicing family law for the past 9 years. In addition to my law degree, I hold an advanced law degree called an LLM. Prior to family law, I litigated tax controversy cases and I helped businesses formation, contracts, and mergers and acquisitions. My background gives me this unique ability to understand businesses and help business owners going through a divorce. You asked about my philosophy. My philosophy regarding family law is that everyone has a fundamental right to happiness and everyone can survive divorce and come out of the process stronger and more financially independent than they were during the marriage. This is their opportunity to redefine who they are and what they want.
Well, what a great resume and philosophy about work. Yep, that's why we're business partners here. Okay, so today's topic, I'm talking about community property and businesses. I've gone over the basics of community property. It's pretty easy to understand when you're talking about physical property. You got a house, you can either sell it, divide up the money, or somebody buys somebody else out. But a business, it's not something that's tangible, it's not physical. Even if you have that old-fashioned brick and mortar store, can you explain why a business is viewed as community property here in the state of California?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a really great question that you have. So the idea is that everything that spouses do during a marriage has to be for the benefit of this community. You've discussed what the community is, but what this means is that in addition to that tangible things that are required during the marriage, like the car, the house, or the bank account that you mentioned, the two spouses' efforts, so everything that they do also has to be for the community. So from a business perspective, the business itself is an asset, but so are the efforts that are associated with that business.
So really quick, you're talking about the efforts here. Now, this is in lieu of somebody going out, getting a W-2 job. W-2 earnings, that's all community property too, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. So instead of someone working and earning a paycheck, that would be, essentially funds that are deposited into a community bank account. The business owner's efforts are growing a business, and they're earning their wages through that business, and they're also earning profits and increasing goodwill. So just like a house or a bank account that appreciates over time, the business, through its effort, also continues to grow. So let me just say, what's complicated about this concept is that the business itself has two components. One, the business itself has a value. You talked about this a little bit earlier, that the community property has to be valued. And the second aspect is cash flow for support. The discussion of support is a little beyond what we're talking about today, but the idea of what the income is helps us understand that community property.
Fantastic. Now, when we're looking at just the very basics, and I know sometimes when we're talking about values of businesses and valuing property in a divorce, it's a little difficult to get to the basics. But for discussion purposes here, let's say you have a business owner, small business, whatever we want to go ahead and define small business. I don't even think that there's a general consensus about that. But let's just say a couple employees, sole shareholder in the business. They're running the business. Maybe they're generating profits. Maybe they're not. As the sole owner of that, when we take a look at that small business and we have to put a value on this, how is the court going to really determine, or really look at what's this value that it's generating to the community?
Well, you're really landing some doozies of questions already in this conversation.
We've only got 30 minutes here, so we're going to dive right in. Here's the reason I ask. I mean, you've seen cases like this. I've seen cases like this where somebody, a spouse will they're not working in the business. So they just say, oh, that business brought in, pick a number here, $200,000. And well, I've done my research online. I'm supposed to multiply it by 3. Oh, the business is worth $600,000. But what they don't realize is you got that $200,000 gross income. Well, there's a lot of expenses there, and the profits are actually pretty low. Meanwhile, the business owner is pretty much spending like 80 hours a week. So I know that's a lot, and that's one of the common things that we see. How do you rectify that situation in looking at what is the business really worth a $600,000 business at that point in time?
So what's really hard to answer about this question, and to answer it succinctly, is that a business is not necessarily worth its gross revenue. Looking at a tax return or a profit and loss statement is not the whole story. It's not a sufficient way to value a business. So often we bring in what's called a business valuator or forensic accountant to take a look at this business, but we also need to consider how the business is run. So if a business is generating, let's say, $200,000 for its owner, if that owner is running the business on their back, then that business isn't really worth $200,000, because they couldn't easily just sell that business for some fair market value and expect somebody else to be able to do what that business owner is doing. So that's why I say your question is very complicated, because it really depends on what the business is, how the business is run, what expenses are being run through the business. It doesn't really matter how many hours a week someone's putting into a business. What really matters is how valuable that business would be to someone else. So the bottom line takeaway is looking at a tax return to look at what their gross revenues are. We're looking at even the net on that tax return or their profits isn't a full story.
It kind of goes back to what I had said in the first segment. When we have a business, a lot of information needs to be presented to the court, like you mentioned, bringing in a business valuator, bringing in an expert to go through all of that. Now, there's different kinds of businesses. Some businesses, they've grown, they've got a lot of equipment, tools, vehicles. Are those assets, how's the court going to look at those assets? Is the court going to look at those assets as community property or as part of the valuation of the business?
Most of the time they're going to be part of the valuation of the business, because they're a part of the business. They're owned by the business. The business uses them. They have little to no value outside of the business, so they're part of the business valuation process.
Now, what about when we look at a service business? There's really no assets or equipment. What are the factors that are really going to be looked at by the business valuator, or even by the court? Because we got to educate the judge about the business. If it's a service business with little to no assets, what are the things that need to be shown to look at that value, or to determine that value?
So the valuation of a service-based business and an asset business, it's not any different. It's exactly the same. There's essentially 3 different approaches that a business valuator can use to do a business valuation. And we don't really need to talk about what those specific types are, but it doesn't change anything. What really makes a difference in those businesses is whether or not the spouse that's working in that business is the sole operator of that business. So, for instance, take a law firm. If the spouse is the attorney and they're producing all of the legal services and they're helping their clients with everything, then that business isn't essentially as valuable to somebody else, because all of the goodwill of that business belongs to that spouse. So the valuation of a business like that is going to be lower than a business that you could just hand over the keys to somebody else. They could just walk in and they could just pick it up and perform whatever service or sell whatever asset that the business sells.
Okay, so a lot of it is going to be determined upon that owner, what they are in fact contributing to the to generating revenue. Really. Now I've heard these terms before, and I want to go ahead and have you define them: in spouse versus out spouse. And I know you've prepared some some papers on these using those terms. So if we're in court, you hear somebody mentioning an in-spouse versus an out-spouse. What are those defined?
Yeah, so the definition of them is pretty simple. The in-spouse is the spouse that's working in the business or operating that business. The out-spouse is a spouse that have no activity or active role in that business. They're like the stay-at-home parent or the W-2 wage earner. They're not involved in the business at all.
So just that specific business, they're not the ones coming in, operating, or have any interaction with that business.
Yeah, and on occasion we have two in-spouses. We have a true family business where both spouses are working in the business, so they're both in-spouses, and those cases are much more complicated to value because generally only one of those spouses can really run the business after a divorce. So in a division of that kind of case, there's added complexity into the buyout because they add different values to that business with their efforts.
Definitely speak with an attorney if you're running a business with your spouse and deciding to separate. We've been using the term business, and I think you and I and maybe our listeners out there are really equating that to a corporation. Typically an S Corp, not going to give any tax advice or talk any more detail about that. But what about entities where there's no corporate formation? You just have this DBA. It's running as a, and I'll use air quotes here, as a business. Is there an issue with valuation or the value that this brings to the community?
So there's issues with all types of businesses and the valuations, mostly with cash businesses. But no, it doesn't make a difference. You don't have to be a formed entity like a corporation or a partnership or a limited liability company. You can be a sole proprietor. If you're a sole proprietor, you file a Schedule C on your tax return, and that is essentially your business. So there's lots of people that run little businesses, and they may or may not realize that's what they're doing. So again, not giving you tax advice, but if you file a Schedule C, you will likely have a business to divide in your divorce.
I feel like that's a softball right into our next topic here. You had mentioned earlier about cash flow in a business. Schedule C obviously is telling the IRS how much, what the expenses are in the business and so forth. But when we're looking at cash flow in a business, what happens? What's the court look at when a business owner is running those personal expenses, all legitimately under the IRS code? Again, no tax advice here. What's the California court going to do when they look at that and see these personal expenses running through the business?
Yeah, so, really broadly speaking, not giving any tax
Absolutely.
advice.
Absolutely. When you get two attorneys together, we got to keep on giving all of these disclaimers, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think really the focus of this is that the definition of income under the California Family Code is broader than the definition of income under the Internal Revenue Code. So what does that mean? It means that we're going to have add backs to someone's income. So on a really broad brush description of this, a business owner's calculation of income is really different than what's reported on a personal tax return. And it's going to include these add backs for what would be ordinary and necessary deductions on a tax return.
Let me actually jump in right here. We hear sometimes spouses go, well, I'm going to contact the IRS because the court says you're taking too many deductions. We're going to do these add backs here. Can somebody get in trouble with the IRS if the California court says, no, this is your income, I'm not going to count it as a deduction?
Yeah, unless it's a criminal act, right? And somebody is doing tax evasion, that's not what we're talking about. What we're talking about is that there are classifications that are ordinary and necessary business expenses. They are legitimate expenses to a business. They are legitimate on your tax return, but it's still income to you because it's paying for something for your benefit. So let me give you kind of an example, right? Is a business owner, we're generally looking at these add backs, and we start with, what are your W-2 wages? What's reported on that income statement? You're probably going to get an add back for health insurance that's being paid for you, that's being paid by the business. You're probably going to get an add back for 401k contributions. Or if you have a family member that's on payroll, but they're not really working in the business, you can still have that family member on payroll, but it's probably going to be income that gets added back to you.
But really quick, you've already talked with your CPA and your tax attorney, because you are running a business here. You have to have that professional preparing all these, and they are legitimate deductions in the IRS or for tax filings.
Yeah, absolutely, right? And then you've got your profit distributions, and you might have travel expenses, right? You're taking legitimate business travel, but then you're also taking some personal add-on time to that business travel. It's all completely legitimate under the Internal Revenue Code. And you might have vehicle or gas expenses, right? And so every personal expense, or arguably personal expense, that if you weren't operating a business would have to come out of your pocket to pay for, that's what we're looking at in terms of these add backs. Because if you were a W-2 wage earner and you had to pay a lease on a vehicle, or you had to pay for a vehicle or pay for gas or something like that, that would be income you would need in your pocket to pay for that expense. So if it's anything that you would need to pay for, but for the fact that you're a business owner, it might be an add back. Now, again, there's nothing wrong with any of these things. They're fine, and you're probably not going to get in trouble for it. There's the definitions are just really different.
Sure. Want to go ahead and make sure we leave some time here to get to these tips for business owners. But, Allison, what is the key piece of advice you would give a business owner going through a divorce so they emerge with a strong and healthy business once the divorce is over?
Yeah, absolutely. And I give this advice to clients and all the time, right? You and your business are going to survive a divorce. Business owners are very resilient. Most of the time, business owners are willing to do what a lot of other people are not willing to do. You grew your business from nothing to something, and you can and will be able to afford the buyout of your spouse from that business because you are going to still operate your business. It's just a buyout. Essentially, you can and you will continue to thrive as long as you continue to make smart decisions regarding your business.
Fantastic. Now, obviously, I got to throw in a shameless plug here. You obviously have this wealth of knowledge about representing business owners in a divorce, what to look out for here. So tell us, a business owner that's going through a divorce, contemplating a divorce, what's the best way they can get in touch with our firm to talk with a member of our team?
Yeah, the absolute easiest way is to contact us at 951-587-8970, or you can contact us on the web at thegraylegalgroup.com. Again, that's gray with an E.
Fantastic. 951-587-8970. Allison, thank you for sharing this very important information with our listeners. When we return, Allison's going to share the top 5 things you need to do as a business owner if you find yourself divorcing your spouse here in California. We'll be right back. Today, we've been talking about community property and businesses and what business owners need to know in a divorce. Now, Allison is going to share with us her top 5 tips to save time and money in your divorce. Allison, go ahead and kick off this list.
All right. Thanks, Mike. All right. So these are the top 5 things that you want to do to save time and money in your divorce. 1, schedule an appointment with your business professionals. That's your CPA and your business attorneys.
Now, we mentioned in the last segment, hopefully business owners do have these professionals that they can rely on. We did talk about the tax filings with your CPA, with your tax attorney. But why is it so important to make sure that you've got your CPA looped in, you've got your business attorney looped into the fact that, hey, I'm going through a divorce now?
Well, 1, they're going to be the keeper of a lot of information. When you're filing your tax returns, you're giving your CPA all of the information that backs up what's in your returns, and that information is going to be necessary in your divorce. So your family law attorney is going to need to have contact with your CPA for that purpose. Your business attorney is going to be vital to your divorce case because they're going to be the keeper of all of your business documents. They're going to have your operating agreements. They might have your buy-sell agreements, any other contracts or anything that's going to be used to help substantiate the value of that business. Your attorney and your CPA is going to have that information.
So they're the ones, they've got the information. They're going to need to work in conjunction with your family law attorney. All right, number two.
Number two, if personal assets are owned by a business, get a copy of all title documents showing the business is the owner. We talked about this a little bit earlier. Those assets are going to be part of the business, and we need to be able to show the title as to how those assets are held. In addition, if you have personal expenses that are being run through that business, you want to print out all of your bank account statements for the last 3 years. And you're going to want to note which items are for personal use or arguably for personal use, and then what are business uses.
Of course, regardless of the tax filings in the Schedule C.
Regardless of those items.
All right, number three.
We want you to open a new personal bank account. The reason for this is that, as we discussed earlier, money that comes out of that business during the marriage, that's community property. But some of the money, like your wages or the profits that come out of that business after, that might be your separate property. So you want to keep the money separate and not put it into what was otherwise a community bank account.
All right, number four.
Super important. Do not bankrupt your business. I see people do this because they think it's a good idea because it's going to lower the business value. It's not. It doesn't lower the business value. All you're doing is probably hurting yourself. So don't bankrupt your business. What's a better idea is to put together a list of projects you've been wanting to work on. This is going to help occupy your time, make you not think about the divorce, but it can also be quick money generators in the event of a cash crunch or needing money for a buyout.
That's actually really good advice for even those not going through a divorce. These lists of projects get that quick money generating in case of that cash crunch, so you can keep maintaining your business going strong regardless of your situation. All right, this number five. This is actually my favorite one. The way how you wrote it up here.
Do not keep secrets from your family law attorney. Your family law attorney is here to help you. Your family law attorney is here to guide you through the process. And if your family law attorney doesn't have all the information, they cannot effectively represent you. So don't keep secrets from your family law attorney.
Definitely make sure that you fully disclose everything. Allison, thank you again for joining me today. Remind those business owners who they should call if they're getting a divorce from their spouse.
Give us a call at the Gray Legal Group. You can reach us at 951-587-8970 or on the web at thegraylegalgroup.com. Again, that's Gray with an E.
That's 951-587-8970. I want to thank everybody who tuned in out there. Remember, you can join us here every Saturday morning on KATY-FM 101.3. For more information about what we've discussed today or to contact the Gray Legal Group, go to 50scalesofgray.com. That's 50scalesofgray.com, Gray with an E. Remember, the Gray Legal Group, because the law is not black and white. Have a great day, everybody. Hi, this is attorney Michael Bender with the Gray Legal Group. Whether you're going through a divorce, child custody dispute, or facing any other family law matter, we understand that you're dealing with emotional and financial obstacles that are unique to your situation. Our compassionate and dedicated team is prepared to address those issues and provide you with the personal attention your case deserves. Call us at 951-404-1545 to schedule your free consultation today. That's 951-404-1545.